Coming up on Help Before You Sell.
A fundamental truth that if you do anything before reflection, all of those together create complete unsustainability.
Reflecting on what you've done, how those stories impacted you, and creating your bingo card of aligned values, strengths, weaknesses, and if it doesn't match up, like if you're not checking off any boxes, try something else.
I think for most of us mere mortals, it's more like a 5 to 20 year journey of like figuring out who we really are and how we can really serve and what actually is our groove.
Does marketing and content creation ever feel hard and time consuming? What if it didn't have to be that way?
Join Rob Drummond,
Matthew Bliss,
and me, Pete Daly-Dickson, your ideal companions on the journey to a value-first approach to business growth, here on Help Before You Sell.
My main treatise here is that before you can go out and help. So the old Rob, the less, I'm not very mature, I think, but like the even less mature version of me would have been like, okay, I'm going to have all this do energy. I'm going to help, sell. It's like, hang on a minute. Let's push pause and like look internally at like who you are, what you stand for, what you're really great at, what's your genius or uniqueness, if you like. And I think you can only go out and help once you've kind of done a bit of reflection inwardly on like, well, how are you best going to help and what really plays to your strengths? Because you're going to have to help in the long term as well. It's not just like a one-time gig of like, okay, I'm going to have like one pre-sales call with someone and that's it. That's my token help. Like, where's the sale? Like, this has got to be like a long-term thing. So it's got to really be in your flow, something that comes naturally to you, where you almost like help by default. I have had storytelling clients come to me where the client has come to me and they've been like, okay, I want to tell my story and pick it apart and so on. And as we start exploring their story, it becomes clear that they're not really clear on like who they are and what their values are. And actually telling your stories, I think it's quite a good way of picking apart that. But then I've had a few clients where they've kind of gone, okay, well, can I engage you to do a separate project to kind of help me with this values work and figure out what my core essence is? And I'm like, no, like it's not it's not really my wheelhouse. I can pick a narrative path through it, but like in terms of like holding up like the mirrors of truth and figuring out, well, who are you really at the core outset? I've got a network of people who I think are much better at it than I am. But yeah, that's my core treatise, is that like before you run off and however you decide to help, whether it's, you know, we obviously love podcasting, but it could be a blog post, it could be anything. I think you need to look inwards first. So I wondered how that lengthy introduction sat for you and what came up.
Well, I think you're speaking to a fundamental truth about doing anything. That if you do anything before reflection, there's a possibility of doing the wrong thing for the wrong reasons in the wrong way, which all of those together create complete unsustainability. And ultimately, that's the biggest thing that I took away from what you said, is that this is a long-term, this is a philosophy of life and business that is for the long haul. So if it's going to be for the long haul, then you've got to make sure the foundations are set. And the only way you can set the correct foundations is to go inwards, just to see what you've got to play with in terms of laying those foundations. I don't think that adds any more to what you said, but yeah, definitely resonated.
I've just set my audience a challenge of like, next year, my challenge is every 2 weeks, I would like you to produce one outstanding world-class piece of content that is good enough for people to save and share and isn't the same as all of the AI generated nonsense that everyone else is creating. And I've said in it, okay, I think for a lot of people, verbalizing it and creating a podcast is the easiest, lowest friction. But you know what? Like, just do it in however you find easiest. I default to writing first, but I think I'm in a relative minority in that sense.
I think opening the content up to whatever is most comfortable for the person is an ideal thing. But the thing that I would be fearful of after being on a podcast recording, talking about it last night, is avoiding the AI thing. Because there's a thing at the moment where people create one piece of content and then squeeze the blood from the stone to create 10 average to poor pieces of content simply because it can be done for them. So having that inward check to evaluate what you've created as the single thing that you do every 2 weeks, that is the effective piece of content, that is the best that you could possibly do within that 2 weeks and is in your zone of genius. That stuff altogether, I think, is a thing sorely missed. We worry about spreading too thin these days, I think.
Go a bit deeper.
Yeah. Do you think, Rob, that the internal reflection is to figure out what you're going to say or how you're going to say it, or both, or something else?
There's different aspects of this, isn't there? There's which modality plays best to you. So should it be podcasting? Should it be meetings? Are you just great at meeting people and having conversations? So there's that aspect. There's also the what to say and going deeper internally in terms of, well, I think as well, it comes down to clarity of like, well, where is it that you're trying to get to beyond just the next few months? Like, what change is it that you're trying to enact with your work? And even clarity, because that's going to be guided by who you are at your core and your values and what you stand for and your experiences to date.
That is going to be a strength, I think, as well, because there was a strong movement after Tim Ferriss came back on the strong podcasting scene, where telling a story became an important movement among social posting. And now I think people's radars are a little bit more sensitive to someone spinning a yarn to get to a sale. Moving away from creating the story and instead thinking about that long-term goal will allow you to create more authentic content in whatever purpose that is too. Like telling a story about how you went down the street to pick up your morning coffee as your daily ritual. And if you like daily rituals, download my free lead magnet and book a call with me so we can talk about your productivity.
It's like one level deep when there's actually about 47 levels underneath that you could go much deeper. And it's also about permission, because people post this stuff on LinkedIn to people that don't really know them. And there's a story about how I was making baked beans this morning and I put some pepper on it and it made it spicy. And do you need some more spice in your marketing? Then you need to reach out to me and have a one-to-one. Yeah.
I say all this. I know I did one great one not recently, maybe 8 months ago. And it's really the only post I've done of that type on LinkedIn, where I wrote it after I went on a walk. And not sure if people know, but in Ireland, you drive on the left, but you walk on the right for some reason. I think there's signage around where it says walk on the left, but people just walk on the right for some reason. And the post that I wrote remarked on whether I was going to push myself to be on the left and play chicken with the person who was coming.
My inner rebel wants to do that.
Yeah, I do it a lot because I'm like, it's left. You drive on the left. Why should it be different? But I leveraged that into a discussion about how you do your podcasting stuff, I think. Like, just because everyone walks on the right or the left, or if someone's walking in front of you, are you leveraging your podcast content, creation journey in a way that allows you to walk your own step? Or do you have, I think I asked a question at the end, do you walk on the left or the right in your country? And that was a strong story that resonated with people because they think, oh yeah, I've lived in other countries and they walked on the wrong side of the road and I didn't even think about it. But I think it resonated strongly because the story overpowered the message. And like I would be a strong value before sale kind of guy. Like I'm all about giving you everything I've got before you give me any money. So I think someone coming back to that LinkedIn message would probably say, yeah, the story was great. But like, as we like to say, there's no whiskers there. Like the cat isn't even present. It's just a big pile of cheese.
Are we in fact thinking about marketing in a completely different way?
Yes. I think marketing is unfortunately the best word we have for this at the moment, but also has all sorts of negative connotations and misunderstandings around it. So here's another thing. Like, you look at two people online who are doing broadly the same thing. One is to external appearances, smashing it out of the park, huge audience, and then you get into their world and they're not even very good. And then you've got another person over here that is brilliant, you think, at what they do. No audience, no traction, doing the same kind of strategies. It's like, why? Why is that the case? And it feels to me like maybe what the second person is putting out is more like a copycat approach, where they've seen person A and gone, that seems to be working for person A. But what works for person A isn't necessarily going to work for person B, because you have to kind of look inwardly first and figure out, well, is that even the right vibration and energy for you and what you're trying to put out? Because you are an energetic, vibrational being. So then the communications that you put out have to match that. Otherwise, you get this mismatch where either the messaging just misses the mark, or you're attracting people that you don't really want. You attract the get rich quick crowd who are looking for magic solutions, and that isn't what you do, because you don't do magic solutions.
It's interesting. I can reflect on a personal story, if you like, that highlights this. So recently, I put something together for Black Friday, inverted commas, more from a desire to, well, I think what you said there, Rob, like a quick buck, just looking at the bank account and thinking, need something here.
What can I do?
And what can I do? Yeah. And so I looked at what other people were doing and put something together. And I shared in a voice note with my coach yesterday that, like, every word and every bullet point that I put on that page about what I was going to deliver for the Black Friday, a part of me died. So I was actually really quite happy that nobody bought with it. And it's no surprise they did, because I don't have an email list. I don't have an audience that's kind of in vibration with that. And then I contrast that with starting to talk to people about this idea of being their thinking partner, just having relatively long form conversations with them once or twice a month to help them clarify their thinking. Basically what I do on Not a Straight Line, but more kind of focused really on their business and stuff that might be going on for them, because that's what you said earlier, Rob. That's what I do intuitively and innately. I have a conversation with someone on Not a Straight Line, and I'm joining dots that they didn't even know were there, because I'm just bouncing around their lives during the conversation. And I have 6 calls booked in my calendar already from people that want to talk about the idea and help me flesh it out. It's completely different result, because I'm now in vibration with who I am.
I have you pegged, and obviously I when I look at you, I know you fairly well, but I still only have like a limited view on this. But I have you pegged as a kind of like a one-to-one analog help type person, not a digital scale type help. Like that to me, based on what I know about you and our interactions over the years, that makes sense. But then it's only when you look back at what you've tried and what has worked and what hasn't worked, and what have you done where the internet has then yawned in your face. And it's tempting to take that personally, and it's actually not. It's just maybe it's just a feedback mechanism that the energy wasn't quite in the right place.
Yeah, we all have to fail at a number of things in order to be able to find what works best. I think failure is a thing that people are too afraid of doing.
My thing's webinars. I keep coming back to webinars. I keep running webinars, and like a handful of the same people show up, and like they'll say, "Oh, it's great, Rob. Yeah, it's great." And I'm like, okay, but isn't really doing what I need it to do. But then, you know, I keep coming back to it every now and again. Like, but was it? The question is it just the wrong approach for me, or like have I just not quite got the tactical stuff right? So,
Well, I've seen some marketing on Facebook that tells you that everything you're doing is wrong and you need these 3 secret tips to run the best webinars ever. Some of them have been in the essence of create this neuroscientific cocktail that will have people addicted to your webinars.
I think it's worth saying that I'm actually very experienced at webinars. I used to have an employed role for an employer who ran webinars pretty much most nights of the week. In the end, that was their main. Was it a marketing strategy or a sales strategy? It was kind of a bridge between marketing and sales, but because they realized it worked and that they had an approximate model of, you know, if we could get 300 or 500 people on a webinar at 8 p.m. on any night of the week, that they might get a sort of 5%, maybe even up to like a 10% close rate if we did it all right. So they were like, right, we're going to go from one webinar a week to webinars every night of the week, which eventually caused me to, you know, have a nervous breakdown at work and leave. But you know, I do have a lot of experience to draw on in terms of what works and what doesn't.
And again, just slightly here, that's us diving into your story and discovering that you're probably doing webinars because that's what you've done for a
the
company
apple
for a long
doesn't
time.
fall far from the tree.
Yeah.
I have another anecdote on that. So when I first started in business, the job I had before I first got into business, that company was very sales oriented. Like their solution to every marketing problem was to make more cold calls, pound the phones even harder, ring more people, speak to more people. I actually worked in marketing at that company. I was a bit of a lost soul, just kind of rattling around. And then eventually I left. And then I got to the point quite quickly where I needed some clients, I needed some business. And I ended up walking around shops in Beaconsfield and High Wycombe, asking shop owners if they would like to speak to me about SMS text messaging. I still feel stressed about now. Like walking into the shop and like trying to speak to the business owner and then being chucked out of one or two shops. Like I'm glad that I did it, but never again. But I did that. I did that because that was the environment that I just come from.
So like, why are you glad you did it, or is that you just saying that as a turn of phrase?
Well, it's a story that I still think about and draw on now, and I think one way to understand your genius, uniqueness, is to explore your story. And every story that I think lodges in your memory either lodges because it was the universe handing your ass to you and teaching you a lesson, which was the case in that situation, or it lodges because it felt right, it felt good, it felt like you were on track. So the flip side of that story would be about 6 years ago now, I run a 3-day storytelling workshop that you came to, Pete. It's called the Big Story Workshop, which was a lot of work to put on, and it was quite tiring to do. And it was actually a bit of an experience as well. Like we did the pie, peas, and whatnot tour of the pie, peas, and beer tour of Sheffield in the evening, as well as doing the workshop in the day. At the time, Lindsay was in hospital pregnant with Hugo, and I remember walking into hospital the day after, and like I should have been completely shattered, but I felt like I was just like walking around on air. I felt like just like this big infusion of energy, and so I remember it for that feeling afterwards, not for the workshop. I mean, obviously the workshop was, you know, great and whatnot, but it was the feeling afterwards that was the polar opposite of walking into those shops. I mean, it also as well, like one thing, because of the chaos theory of knock-on effects, like you can never fully be sure on how one thing is going to knock onto another. So I did walk into one shop, I did speak to one business owner. He asked me if I could do a website for him, which fell through, but that process got me into being a Google Ads consultant, which was, you know, a pivotal turn in my story. So it was a turning point.
It's about moving forward, isn't it?
And I think going back to earlier, so yes, we got this like reflection and looking inwards, but then there's also a step of doing. But then after you've taken a step of doing, you then have to go, okay, well, how did that feel?
The conversation I had yesterday with my guest, Del Parsons, on Not a Straight Line, I've started to ask, like with Phil Dobson, I said, you know, what's the one thing that you would leave with us, or what's a part of your zigzag journey through life that you haven't talked about that you think we should know about? Just something like that, just to kind of start to sum up. And Del, she coaches female founders. That's exclusively, very, very successful at what she does. So I said, well, let's pretend that there's a high possibility that as a female founder listening to this episode, what would you say to her? What would you ask her? Well, no, she said, what's the best question you could ask her right now? And Dal just looked at the camera and just said, what do you want? Do you think that's a valuable question in the context of what we're talking about now?
I think it is. I think my own feeling for myself is, it's like, what do I actually want? It's almost like a life's work. I hope I figure it out before I slip off the mortal coil.
do you have to have some sort of certainty about that before you start helping people, before you sell to them?
I think you can start out with good intentions, but I think it must help.
I think you kind of have to, because I've been reflecting on my journey the last year and a half of doing podcast editing full time, which came about as a result of a thing that I enjoyed and was good at, but also my inability to find an appropriate employed role in Ireland after I moved from Australia. It's very easy to sell yourself for a thing you do well, but doesn't give you what you want necessarily. I'm not saying that wasn't the case here, but what I've discovered is if you commit yourself to do a thing that takes a lot of your time and it doesn't activate you and it doesn't give you what you want, if extracting yourself is going to be very hard, then it's going to be a very tough thing to try and it'll be like steering an ocean liner instead of a dinghy sometimes. You know, you don't want to hormosy your way to a 600 employee business across 3 continents with 100 locations and then suddenly decide or figure out what you want and that it's not that.
People do that though, don't they?
They do. And that could be part of their journey. The journey where they experiment and try things and reflect on things. And sometimes it's getting kicked out of a shop that you don't have to go into ever again. Or sometimes it's exiting a business and trying to make that work for you.
I mean, considering this podcast is help before you sell, I kind of get a sense that we've talked around stuff so far on this episode. What's the bullseye of this conversation? What's the takeaway? What's the clear next step of helping a business owner, of us helping a business owner help their clients before they sell? What's the big takeaway, I suppose, from this?
So my stance is that I think there is huge value in exploring your story, and that your story actually is a golden thread that runs right back to the beginning. And that in many ways, on the corest, most internal level, you're the same person now that you were when you were 1. I think I'm basically the same person as I was when I was. It's been fascinating to have kids, actually, and realize that they all come out different. They all come out with these hard-baked differences in, and treated them the same as far as we know, and they are like chalk and cheese. So I think they come out hard-baked, and you have this like kernel. It's like you have this like grain of popcorn at the center of you that has its unique shape and whatnot, and then it's covered with layers of your meat suit and your experiences and your mental narratives and things that you've learned. And kids don't worry about that; they just go out and act as themselves anyway. Whereas we've had to learn how to fit in at school and fit in employed roles, and make our way in life in some capacity. And I think it's more about unlearning and unpicking. And I think for me, the best way of doing that is to go back through your story and ask yourself, how did you, for the stories that do lodge in your memory, and they might not even be main turning points. Like when I think back to my story, it's random things that I remember from school, like being forced to do, I say being forced, it felt like being forced to do rugby training on a cold, muddy field in January after school and not being able to feel my hands. It's like, well, that lodges in my brain. Yeah, okay, there was quite a lot of pain involved in being smashed over the head with a tackle bag and stuff like that. But I think as well, like, there's reasons why I remember stuff like that, and I remember it because it didn't feel. I mean, there were there were other boys there who seemed to be having a great time, and I was I was not.
You
having
weren't
a great,
one of them.
I was not having a great time. Eventually, I discovered that I could just do athletics and just do the running pass, and if I did cross country, people would leave me alone for quite a long chunk of time. And you know what? I still like to be left alone for a chunk of time sometimes. Like I've not changed, so that's part of it. That's even though it's the story in itself is kind of random. It's still the fact that you recall it means that there's some feeling attached to that. So I think you can sort of get a feel for it by exploring what are these stories that you remember, why do you remember them, how did they make you feel at the time. In all honesty,
And I'm going to play the role that Matt usually takes in our conversations. We've been talking about cat's whiskers, but I'm going to show my horns, my devil horns, and play
devilishly advocate. Yep.
Yeah. How does what happened to me when I was growing up and figuring stuff out, how can that have a slightest import on me marketing my business and helping me sell to clients and make more money and whatever?
Well, it defines your frame of reference at the moment, doesn't it? It defines the barriers of what you can perceive and what you view as possible and impossible, what you can do and what you can't do.
Or maybe what you should do and shouldn't do. Like, I almost think of it as reflecting on what you've done, how those stories impacted you, and creating your bingo card of aligned values, strengths, weaknesses, and seeing and checking that bingo card against what you're trying to do. And if it doesn't match up, like if you're not checking off any boxes, maybe try something else. I think that's the key. Maybe not a bingo card, but a checklist. Like, have something rigid with a set of maybe rules that you can derive that relate closely to your exploration, is a constantly changing list as you explore your story and discover more about yourself, but gives you a very simple thing to check and reflect on what you're doing and say, I'm doing these webinars, but it's not checking all the boxes for me. Is there a marketing avenue that I could be delivering the value I want to enable those sales? And does it align to this checklist of values that I've discovered through my exploration of my story? For the hard and fast people who love a nice rigid tip, I think that's what I'm pulling out of what we've discussed today.
I think that understanding who you are at your core essence and the real value that you can provide is actually what the world needs. I think if we actually taught this at school, like imagine the transformation that would occur.
So just say that again.
I think this is what the world needs. I think the world needs humans to properly understand who they are and the value that they can provide, which has always been the case in a tribal setting. Like if you're in a tribe of 50, let's say up to 100 people, let's say, like, you need to know what you can bring to the table, because the survival of the tribe depends on that. You need to be in the right roles. If you're apt at hunting or whatever, then that needs to be known. Other people need to know what you can do and what you can bring to the table. I think that's still true. It's just that we hide in companies and bureaucracy and whatnot. I think it's less true for entrepreneurs who, if what you're doing isn't energetically right, then eventually your results will reflect that. But when I think about why am I having these conversations, it's like, well, that if I can help push people to do that inner work, that I can't help them do it. I can only say this is, I think, is work worth doing. But I think it's going to move us towards an expansion of human consciousness, which I think is what we need. That's obviously so we start off talking about marketing, and marketing is only one aspect of that. But this is the real work. It's like you start off as doing it as a marketing exercise and realize that there's actually 12 levels further down.
Yeah, I think that's the problem, isn't it? Like you have a lot of people, certainly that I've talked to on the Not a Straight Line podcast, have had a corporate career of some description, whether it's like large corporate or working for companies, employed employed part of their story, their journey. Then for whatever reason, they make the transition into self-employment and, running their own business. And as soon as the rubber hits the road on that particular part of their journey, all previous aspects of a sense of security, really, in terms of monthly paycheck and all that comes with it, that disappears. And the only thing that can replace that certainty, that security, is clients who are paying me money to get the value of that I provide. Then you go your first month in business and you've not sold anything, and you go your second month and you're still really trying to figure it out, and you go your third month and there's still, maybe you get one person as paid money. So then the blinkers do the blinkers come on, or do you kind of open up and go, what can I do? What can I do to get more clients? So is it any wonder really that business owners find themselves in the place that they're in, because there is this deep anxiety about, how am I going to pay the mortgage? How am I going to pay the bills? How am I going to survive without the security of what I've had in my previous existence? How do you get the end result of, I don't really know what the question, it just seems too lofty, too kind of airy-fairy. Oh, just explore my story and kind of figure out who I am and whatever. And then the clients are going to come to me? No.
I think it's okay to have different forms of work, though. I think it's okay. So you just made the leap from corporate to self-employment. Your first client could well be your former employer. It could be connections that through that. They could even be doing pretty much the same work that you were doing for your employer, just without the employer skimming most of the value off the top. That probably isn't your highest value calling. It probably isn't the most value you can provide, but it's a starting point.
I really think entrepreneurship needs its own section based on how we've discussed in this episode, not section, but like an entire episode. Because where my brain went with entrepreneurship when you brought it up, coming back from a corporate, is that there's an irony to it, where if the tenets are about sustaining a business and activating you, there are people who are entrepreneurs who will exploit that at the same time. There are people who try to sell methods of selling and doing marketing from the lowest common denominator in order that they can make money. There are people who sell cold email leads for, pennies on the dollar. Mm. There are people out there that will exploit systems and exploit inadequacies in entrepreneurs in order to sell their own stuff. Now, aligning it to what we've been talking about, you can almost guarantee that someone doesn't feel good about doing that. And if they do, then that's the exploration of their story, and they know as much about themselves as they need to. They want money. But at the same time, the entrepreneur who's coming into their own, trying to do it, what I may hesitate to say, but for the context we'll say is the right way, to activate them and to deliver value to people before they sell their product. It's a very individual journey. And the complexity of the entrepreneur's journey from a corporate, discovering that you're your own accountant, your own bookkeeper, your own time manager, your own equipment troubleshooter, all those aspects together make it incredibly complicated. And probably the last thing you're thinking about at the beginning of that journey is, okay, so what values do I have and what can I learn from my story? Like, if you haven't done that work before you become an entrepreneur, you're probably not going to have a huge amount of time for it. But at the same time, there's value there. So I think the entrepreneur can get their own episode, because there's probably companies that would think about delivering value before selling on the back of our conversations as well.
I want to address the company aspect of this as well, because I think the values of a company stem primarily, I think, from the values of the founder/founders. So if the founder/founders are not clear on where they're trying to get to, what their story is, what they stand for, what change they want to enact, then you just get an unclear company culture where it is then led by pocket first activity. You're just doing whatever earns the most short-term revenue.
As Simon Sinek calls it, the finite game. The stock dip, the next sales quarter, you don't have values to measure against.
Okay, so I'm playing the role of the listener here. I've heard what you've said. I'm getting the results in my business that I'm getting, and what I hear you guys saying to me is that in order to get, if I'm not happy with those results, in order to get better results or different results, then a deep inner reflection of me, who I am, what I stand for, how my story right back has informed who I am. That work is required in order to start getting different results in my business. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and until you feel that to be true, the universe will continue slapping you around the face until you get the message.
And I could keep doing more things, but they will probably keep continuing to be hard and time consuming.
Yeah, because you go off track for you. Going back to the entrepreneurial thing, I think that some people just seem to become entrepreneurs and just have this like relatively quick success. I think for most of us mere mortals, it's more like a 5 to 20 year journey of like figuring out who we really are and how we can really serve and what actually is our groove. And then when you hit that groove, I'm not even sure I'd put myself in that bracket yet. I follow Perry Marshall quite closely and as a mentor, and he says that most business people don't really hit their stride until they're in their 40s or 50s, and it just takes a period of time of figuring out what your groove is, who your crowd is, marrying the two together somehow.
So are we in fact saying that working in and growing your own business is actually a vehicle to working on and growing yourself?
Correct. It's the fastest way of growing yourself. And like I've been in business for 13 years or so. And I think I'm finding my groove. I don't think I'm fully in my groove, but I think I'm finding it. I've been in employment 3 times in that time. Every time I go back in employment, it's because I just want to tap out for a little bit and just play on easy. And then within about 2 or 3 weeks, I'm like, okay, I need to go back to it. I'm not going anymore. I need to get back in the game. But I'm always juggling life and whatnot, and other things, young babies and stuff. And that's okay. It's okay to be kind to yourself as well and give yourself more time.
So I wonder if that's one of, if not the big takeaways from this episode, that you're not in business to make money and get your marketing sorted out and sell more clients. You're actually, you might not know this, but you actually started your business because you recognized that there was a bigger version, bigger, better. I hesitate to use the word better, but that you were capable of more.
Because you're a powerful, authentic, individual human who can act in an extraordinary level of service to other people. And it's going to take some time to figure out who those people are and what that service is.
And it comes from figuring that out for yourself first.
It does. I think coming back to the question of why explore your story, I think potentially it's a way of not shortcutting, but maybe just limiting the number of wrong turns that you take.
Yeah.
It becomes like a decision-making guideline of like when some kind of short-term pocket first opportunity comes along, do you want to do this? And say no.
Okay, so let's get practical. How can I do that? How can I explore my story? How can I do the kind of work that you guys have been talking about on this episode? Speak to 2 groups of people. One, I've got almost no money to invest. If there are people out there that can help me do this, I don't have very much money to do that. And the other group of people is, I've had some form of success in my business. I've got money to invest and help me and my business grow. What are the options for those 2 groups of people?
The answer is the same for both 2 groups of people. Is to find someone to speak to. If you got money, you can find what we call a conversation partner who is trained prompting you and exploring the story in dialogue, but it could be anyone.
And you can observe conversations through other podcasts, finding people that align to the way that you are, in the same way that I'd advise fitness people to follow the people on YouTube that most closely align with their goals.
That's a really good point, actually. The podcasts that I listen to are not necessarily just the problems I'm trying to solve right now, or it's just the people that I resonate with in terms of, I just they share a bit of their story. I like what they're doing.
Similar journey. They share a bit of themselves, and you see yourself in them. And podcasts being a conversational medium, it aligns almost exactly to what you mentioned just then.
It's interesting that you say the answer is the same for both groups of people. Just find someone to talk to. That in that you're saying, I guess, that it's not something that you can just do on your own. You can't just.
It's much harder to do by yourself. If that's, I will add to that it's infinitely harder to explore your own story than it is to explore someone else's, due to proximity and your ego kind of stomping in the way and standing there blocking out the sun, so you can't see anything else. But if you do it by yourself, I mean, you can go to a Costa Coffee and take your notebook, and it'll activate all sorts of other inner demons that say, hey, you're not working right now. No one's paying you right now. Is this even work? Does your story actually matter? Have you done anything meaningful with your life? Are you sure? Like all of these, it's like playing whack-a-mole with like your subconscious. So yeah, I mean, you can do that if you want to play whack-a-mole, and okay. So doing that is better than not doing it. But I think it's easier to do it in dialogue.
So what are some guys? So this isn't just like a common or garden conversation I might have with a mate down the pub. What kind of guidance and tips can you give about that conversation?
I find it very helpful to record it. The act of recording it tells you, first of all, that it matters. It transforms it from being a conversation into it calms down your subconscious by saying, okay, we are doing work. I'm recording it. The recorder's going. This is work. Calm down. Back off. Let me do it. So have a recorder. It could just be like an app on your phone. Like that's what I used to use for a lot of like meetings. Which is I wouldn't even always, if I was speaking to Mr. Big, I'd just turn it on and not tell them, because I needed to record what they were saying, because what they were saying was going to go into their marketing. Whereas if you tell people you're recording them, they freak out a bit. So yeah, so I think that's probably the first and easiest option, is just to have a recorder app on your phone, leave it on the table.
What about? Okay, so I'm a business owner. I want to do this work of going inwards, exploring my story, kind of joining dots and stuff, figuring myself out so that I can in turn help more people before I sell to them. What tips can you give me to give to the person that I choose to have a conversation with, to help them guide me? Let's say I'm not going to pay for a professional conversation partner. I'm just going to find someone who's in my network that can help me.
Similar advice. It can be helpful to have at least a rough framework of questions of like things that they might ask you.
Is that something we could provide people?
Yeah, I've got a template for that. Yep. Yeah. I when a new client comes on board with Activate Your Podcast, there's certain questions that we do generally get them to think about.
Yeah.
Even if so, what I should say actually is those questions are not a rigid constraint to the discussion. They're just a starting point to like get you thinking about things. And for me, if I'm asking the questions, it's a fallback of like, okay, if the conversation runs dry, we can just pick out another question and start digging. Sometimes you dig, but just under the surface, this oil shoots up, and you realize that you've hit gold, and that's fine. You can kind of swim in that pool for a while and see where it goes. And sometimes you dig and you just get earth, and that's fine. You kind of move on to something else.
Yeah, and I think in terms of us, this podcast is called Help Before You Sell. So let's help the listener, whether or not we ever sell to them. Let's give them that template so that they can find someone to ask them those questions and get the result that they're looking for.
Okay, well, we'll put it in the show notes.
I've very staunchly avoided taking the devil's advocate stick and say, that my internal reflection model does not exceed, but is incredibly strong and might be the outlier to your case, Rob, of explaining that being in conversation is much more valuable. But should I tell that story on another episode, it will seem sad. The guy who sits in his philosophy lectures with no one next to him to participate in the discussion. So instead, I try to wrestle my brain into taking the opposite case to what I think. And sometimes I can convince myself of the other side.
You got to live in your mind palace.
But that will be valuable for a different episode. I think that's a skill as well that I don't know. I possess a little bit of it, but that would be good to learn from you, Matt. So
you'd be good at the scientific inquiry with that approach.
Also great at self-criticism. So get ready for that, guys. When
yeah. You got sharp blades, and the blades can be used for positive or negative purposes. So
that's it. You can't be your own surgeon.
Well, I think we both talked around, and I think we also got to the bullseye in this conversation.
I think this is the beginning, though.
This is the beginning. It's a deep well, this conversation. I should say, actually, I'm reading Angela Tsai's new book, Awaken Your Inner Diamond, at the moment, and I strongly recommend that. I've actually taken a screenshot just to possibly round off this call. But she says, your true extraordinariness is the thing that makes you special and uniquely valuable to the world. It is rarely something that you will wake up and realize yourself one day on your own. Quite often it's something we take for granted. It's so obvious and natural to us to use our gift that we never even think to value it. It's mixed in with everything else that feels obvious to us and is common sense, like turning off the tap when we are finished with it so as not to waste water. But again, that is not always common sense to everyone.
It's great. And I've started reading the book as well. And actually, Angela had the launch of her book earlier on this week. And I reflected that great. You earlier on, Rob, you talked about, what do you say about human consciousness, evolving it, raising it?
We need an upgrade in. I think we're a very intelligent and very stupid species, and we need an upgrade. We need an upgrade in consciousness as to who we are, and actually in how we can be in service to others.
And there was something that I read in Angela's book that resonated with something that I saw Nick Askew, a wonderful writer and filmographer on Substack. They were saying the same thing, but in a slightly different way. And we're also really effectively saying the same thing. And it's just great that we're not kind of just standing on a podium like complete nutters. We're the only ones saying it. It's like,
those are the truths. So when you can triangulate it across multiple voices that you trust, then that's where the truth lies.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Help Before You Sell, sponsored by Activate Your Podcast. To activate your podcast and help the people who most need you and your services, head to activateyourpodcast.com/help. If you found this episode helpful, please also leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And remember, help more to sell more. See you next time.